I am Sinead Lynch, and with my colleague Lance Guilford, we have been appointed to examine the Glasgow City Council Ibrox Stadium event day emergency route and parking order, and the date of that order is to be finalised should it be made. I will be leading the discussion this evening. My colleague Mr Guilford chaired the event which was held yesterday into another order into Celtic Park and the Emirates Arena. However, we are both jointly responsible for reporting on both orders. This order fits into an overall policy framework for the management of parking within Glasgow, and this is set out in a number of committee reports prepared by Glasgow City Council, and those reports are available on the website. We intend to examine this order in the context of that policy framework, but only insofar as it is relevant to determining whether or not this order proceeds or not. Following complaints made by residents within the area, the Council proposed to make the order to improve the amenity of residential areas in the vicinity of the stadium and to encourage more sustainable transport to the stadium. There is a statutory process set out in the traffic regulations which the council must follow, and a copy of those regulations is available on the webpage. This provides for appropriate consultation with specific organisations and then the publication of the order, which took place in this case in 2018. Following the publication and consultation process, there were approximately 1,570 submissions received. A number of objectors have exercised their right to be heard, which is why we are here this evening and holding a hearing before we provide a report to Glasgow City Council. The Council is the promoter of the order, and therefore it is for the Council to justify the order through the hearing process. However, the statutory process allows us as reporters to hear evidence from anyone with an interest in the subject matter of the order, and in these circumstances and with the agreement of the Council, we have decided to hear evidence from those who have made representations both objecting to and supporting the order. We consider that this is required to properly examine the matters raised in the representations made and to form a balanced conclusion when we provide our report to the Council. You will hear us generically refer to representations throughout the course of this evening. That encompasses both objections and those who've made supporting submissions. Despite parties not having raised substantial comments following the consultation process, we as reporters have specifically decided to request evidence from Police Scotland, Strathclyde Passenger Transport, Scottish Fire and Rescue Services and Scottish Ambulance Services. These parties have management responsibility for transport and health and safety matters in the vicinity of the proposed order, and therefore may have a very significant contribution to make in the examination of the matters raised in the representations made. This evening, there will be no discussion of the merits in terms of the order. We are simply here to look at the procedures which will be required to carry out the hearing in an efficient and timely manner. All of the merits of the case will be heard at the hearing itself. We determined that a pre-hearing meeting was required because of the complexity of the hearing process, the number of submissions made, and the subject matter raised in those submissions. This pre-hearing meeting is for those who had indicated their intention to participate in the hearing, and it also covers those who are not entirely sure, and after this pre-hearing meeting they may decide to rely on the written submissions they have already made. The letter dated the 7th of February 2020 was directed only to those who had already made representations, and we would at this point like to apologise for any confusion which arose from the use of the ticketing mechanism originally. This was outside our control, and as soon as we realised that those with a legitimate interest in attending this meeting were unable to do so, the manner of ticketing was changed, and you would all have received another letter asking you to respond to the programme officer to confirm your attendance. We're now content that all parties who wish to take part in this process are involved, and we have, however, retained the ability for people who had not made representations but expressed an interest in the pre-hearing meeting to attend this evening, should they wish to do so. The hearing itself will be held in public, and provision will be made for anybody with an interest in the subject matter to attend, and we'll further discuss that matter under the heading Participation in item 5 of the agenda. For clarity at the hearing, we will examine all of the issues raised in the objections made to date. Are there any queries or questions at this point in time before we move on to the next agenda item? Sorry.
No, I just make one point.
Yeah.
Sorry, just one additional thing. It's a fairly minor point. In parallel with the hearing process, those who decide to rely on written submissions may receive a request for information if we feel that we don't have sufficient information to address anything raised in the representation. This would normally involve just the person making the representation and the council, although it may involve other people. So it was just to say, if people decide not to take part in the hearing, there may still be a written submission process. That's in addition to the general right that there is to make additional written submissions in your own right. So it was just for clarification.
Okay, thank you. Any questions arising from that? No. Item 2 is the content of the order. You've all been provided with an explanatory note, which essentially provides background information on the order. The order includes schedules as set out in the explanatory notes, and these schedules are accompanied by maps which show where the emergency routes and parking restrictions would apply should the order be made. These maps and schedules are available on the Ibrox Stadium webpage as contained at glasgow.gov.uk. At the hearing, we will be specifically asking the City Council to explain those maps and schedules so it is clear to everybody taking part exactly what the implications geographically of the order are. And we anticipate this will take place in the first session of the hearing. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the content of the order at this point in time? Okay, if everybody's content, we can move forward. Item 3 is a summary of representations. We recognise that the vast majority of the large number of representations were objections to the principle of the order, and having read through those representations, we feel that those could be split into about 10 or so key issues for examination at the hearing. These are the key issues set out at bullet points under paragraph 3.3 of the explanatory note. Some of these can be considered subcategories of perhaps more major items, but these are the issues that we felt the matters raised in representations logically fell into. There are also a number of key site-specific issues which are listed in paragraph 3.4 of the explanatory note. These don't cover everything, and during the next part of the process we would expect perhaps other topics to be raised. Should they be relevant and require examination, anything raised will be fully examined at the hearing itself. There are also some very detailed individual site-specific examinations which will be examined separately to these topics. They may be, and we expect they probably will be, examined by written submissions, but all of those will be publicly available on the webpage for all parties to view. In addition to the objections to the order, there were a not insignificant number of supporters of the order who generally are residents who live within the zone, and these are referred to in paragraph 3.5 of your explanatory note. We have had a number of residents who indicated their intention to attend this meeting this evening, who had not made representations when the order was originally consulted upon, but they have requested now to take part in the hearing, and we will address that section of representation specifically when we get to item 5. In addition to those topics that we've identified in the bullet points at paragraph 3.3, we have also prepared a summary of the matters raised in submissions, and this is also on the web page. We consider it to be a fairly comprehensive overview of the representations, and in addition to summarising the representations, we have provided also a schedule which groups like representations with like as they relate to the identified topics set out in the bullet points at paragraph 3.3. This obviously will be an ongoing process until the beginning of the hearing and will be developed particularly as perhaps groups of people begin to work together to make combined or conjoined representations. Again, we will discuss that in more detail at item 5. Are there any queries at this stage about the nature of the representations, Mr. Bailey McLeod?
Thank you very much, Sinead. My name is Norman McLeod, Bailey Norman McLeod. I'm one of the councillors for the Public Shields Ward, approximately 3/4 of which, it would be my estimate, is within the scope, or the geographical scope of the order. I'm starting to be a little confused in relation to the extent to which you and Lance would welcome or are open to representations further to those that were made, or rather apart from or in addition to those that were made at the time of the public consultation. I'm looking, for example, at your paragraph 5.2, where you state the reporters will then seek to identify other parties who wish to participate. Now, in my potential naivety, my understanding was that those of us who wished to make an expression either of objection or support to the proposed order had a period of time in which we were entitled so to do. We were entitled at that time to indicate if the matter went to a hearing, or subsequently to make clear if it was going to a hearing that we wanted to participate in any such hearing. But what I'm not clear of is whether or not you're at this stage throwing out an invitation to people who may not timeously have made a representation before, but who might have an interesting point of view or information which may or may not be of interest to you, and whether that is an offer that you're making, and if so, how such persons should make their interest in making what in other terms would be a late representation, making it known to you.
Yes, generally, no. There will not be another opportunity to make representations from parties who have not been involved in the process to date. As you rightly say, the opportunity was afforded within a very fixed period of time to make representations on the draft order, as Glasgow City Council did in accordance with the regulations. You will be aware that the parties contacted to attend the pre-hearing meeting this evening are those who have already made representations. Mr. Guilford and I have identified organisations that we felt could contribute to the hearing process and to our examination of the draft order, and we have specifically invited those parties, but there will not be an opportunity for general public participation beyond the process that has already begun. Should a party identify themselves in this intervening period between the pre-hearing meeting and the hearing with perhaps critical evidence, and I can't really think of any critical evidence that a party could provide at this point in time that we don't have from or expect to have from an organisation, Mr. Guilford and I may consider it, but it would be, how shall I say, we certainly won't be inviting any further representations from parties who are not already involved in the process or whom we have not invited to be involved in the process.
I'm a relatively stupid person, and my only way of, my usual way of understanding matters is to say back to the person who's already answered my understanding of their answer. My understanding of your answer is in the exercise of your duties in this matter. As you've just indicated, you've invited Police Scotland and the others that you named to provide evidence or observation to assist you in your duties. And equally, I think you've just said, if there's somebody with very clever and special information or relevant information who has not thus far shared that information with you, there is an opportunity, presumably through the programme officers, for somebody to offer such information to you, and at that stage it would be at your discretion whether or not to accept such additional information. But as to a general reopening to, as it were, the public in general, to join in and make general representations for and against at this stage, the answer is no. Do I correctly understand the answer you've given?
Yes.
Just a bit more clarification maybe as well from my point. I mean, I'm fully in agreement with what my colleague has just said. First of all, that paragraph 5.2 that you refer to, when it says the reporters will then seek to identify other parties, that means other parties who've made representations, not who have not. Just to clear that. And in relation to the specialist advice that we're seeking from Police Scotland, Strathclyde Partnership for Transport, and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and Scottish Ambulance Service, this is because we feel that they have evidence that will contribute to our understanding of the issues that have been raised. So they haven't made representations, we're asking them to attend as expert witnesses. And that's beneficial to our understanding of the situation, and will help us to form conclusions and recommendations to the Council. And we think it will also help other parties at the hearing in relation to issues that they've raised. It may help the understanding of the issues that we set out in bullet points.
Good.
In that
Thank you very much indeed. That's very helpful. I guess at this stage my only suggestion for your consideration would be this. You may or may not wish to, in addition to inviting Strathclyde Passenger, whatever they're called, to give evidence, you may or may not perhaps wish to elicit evidence from the providers of public bus services directly, for example, First Bus or McGill's or whatever, or for that matter, if they've not already made representations from those, particularly in a large way of business, who supply coaches. Simply a suggestion that certainly the providers of public transport would have an interest, presumably, wanting to park their coaches somewhere. And again, in fairness and balance, my suggestion is to you, it's simply a suggestion that you might consider seeking to solicit from some evidence from directly from people such as that?
I would say the operators and owners of supporters coaches have made written submissions, and quite a number of the users of those coaches have made submissions as well, and were offered the opportunity. Obviously, a lot of those coach supporters come from Northern Ireland, so therefore we wouldn't expect the owners to be here this evening, but we have their fairly comprehensive written submissions, and
the direct, Sinead, the direct providers of bus public transport, the first buses and the McGills of this world?
Yes. We will be requesting specific information from the public transport providers, both bus and rail, and that will be done in writing, and we expect to have that prior to the hearing. That information will be available to all and will
Excellent.
be on the webpage.
Absolutely excellent. And presumably SPT will give you the details on the underground service?
Yes, they will.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We might actually move on to that a bit more
Yeah.
later on, because SPT have representatives here today.
Yeah.
And,
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Yesterday we did raise the issue of their involvement, which is a strategic one, and so we may pick up the issues of the bus services and ScotRail. ScotRail were invited and decided that they felt they didn't need to attend, but we will go back to them and discuss it further with them, because in terms of the actual infrastructure and the pressures on the infrastructure from the order, then they may have some information to give. So that's just to add to that.
Yep. Okay. Are there any other comments or questions? This gentleman here in the second row.
Thank you. My name is Jim Clark. I'm a supporter of the Rangers Football Club. From what you said about you had to invite the Police Scotland here, did they not have a view on parking in the area?
Well, that's why we've asked them
Yep.
to take part in the hearing.
Did they not have a view? I'm not saying, did they not have a view, didn't put an objection or a support or saying
They
that
have not made a representation as such, but there has been consultation between
Yes.
the council and various organisations, not just Police Scotland.
So they didn't have a view?
But we will be looking at that in a bit more detail later on in terms of their
Yeah.
involvement.
I'm not a politician.
But a gentleman in
They
front
didn't have
of
a view.
you, obviously.
Yes or no?
will have
It's a
a
yes or
role.
no situation. Did they have a view on it?
Yeah. Sorry?
Did they have a view on it? Did they?
They will, I'm sure they will assist considerably
Yes.
in the hearing.
How can you
but
not
we'll
get
hear
a straight?
from,
How can
we
you not
can
get a
hear from
straight
them
yes or
in
no?
in a little while.
How
And
can you not
sorry?
get a straight yes or no for a question?
Sorry?
How can I not get a straight yes or no?
Sorry, what is it
Did the
that you
Police
don't feel
Scotland have
you've-
a view on the parking?
Well, we'll ask
Yeah.
them very shortly, and you'll have some
Still not-
further
thank you.
information about how they're going to take part in the hearing.
Can I maybe
Well, actually, this person behind you has a. Yep.
All right.
This person behind has a question. Yep. Oh.
Thank you. Stuart Roxburgh, representing Craigton Community Council. It's quite a short point, actually. Our representation that was put up on the website has got the first page of it missing. I was just wanting to ask what the process is to get that rectified.
If you could contact the programme officer directly and advise them that the first page is missing, it will be rectified as soon as
Yeah,
possible.
so I want to make sure that,
No,
the people are not reading our submissions and not getting
Yep.
the full story.
No, if you could contact the programme officer directly.
Okay, right, thank you.
Thanks. Right. Mr MacLeod.
In relation to the gentleman's question, I have to confess, sir, I am a politician, but I'll try and give you an answer which may be of assistance to you. My understanding is that before the council promulgated, published, suggested, literally published its proposals, it was obliged to consult people like Police Scotland, Scotland Fire and Rescue, Ambulance Service and so on and so forth. And therefore, at that time, as between Police Scotland and the Council, there will have been an exchange of information and views. Where the reporters were being candid with you, sir, is that in relation to their job, which basically is to consider what the Council is proposing to do and the views that other people have, they have taken the time and trouble to say to these other organisations that they, the reporters, frankly, would like in writing or at least represented at the hearing to hear from these organisations so that when they're doing their final report. So I guess the short answer is, at the moment, the reporters don't have the views of Police Scotland, but to imply that they had no involvement at all at any stage would be to overstate it. So that may have muddied the issues. I'm actually trying to answer your question.
Well, I think probably the easiest thing to do, rather than have a dialogue, is perhaps if the representative from Police Scotland, would you like to address this matter now? We can wait until... If you'd like...
Sorry, don't like microphones. Scott Simpson, I'm the Community Inspector based at Govan. In terms of the position, the Police Service of Scotland, then this is a proposal that has been made by Glasgow City Council, full stop. We obviously have a professional opinion in terms of, based on experience in terms of traffic management and other such issues, and obviously the policing of events in relation to emergency routes, etc. But a written submission of the best evidence from the best people within the organisation of Police Scotland, will submit that to yourselves, and that will be heard at that stage.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
We'll be coming back to that issue very shortly, actually.
Does that answer? Okay, right, thank you. Good. Any other comments or queries or questions at this stage before we move on to item 4, the format of the hearing itself? No. Section 4 of your explanatory note sets out the main points relating to the format of the hearing. The hearing will basically take the format of a structured discussion, which will be led by myself and Mr. Guilford, in accordance with an agenda which will be prepared by us and which will be issued to you all prior to the hearing. This agenda will be based on the key topics that we wish to examine. You may wonder why certain matters raised in representations are perhaps not being debated at the hearing. That is probably because we are content that the written submissions made fully address those matters and we don't need to hear any more evidence on them. The purpose of the hearing is to enable us as reporters to fully examine the order. So all parties who have expressed a wish to attend and to be heard at the hearing will be accommodated, whether you are part of a group, whether you're a formal organisation, an individual resident or an individual supporter. The hearing will explore the topics based loosely at the moment on the bullet points set out at paragraph 3.3, and it will begin with a strategic session setting out what the order is and the context in which the Council's overall policy approach formulated the drafting of that order. Evidence and on behalf of the Council, the Football Club, Police Scotland, SPT, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, Scottish Ambulance, community councils, supporters clubs, residents associations, and any other objector and supporter will be taken in relation to each topic. So we as reporters will have a number of questions for the parties, and there will then be an opportunity for comments and other parties to also raise questions. This will not be in cross-examination style, it will be far more informal, and the intention is to gather information. You may choose to attend all of the hearing sessions or just those that you are directly involved in. And seating will be available for those who wish to observe but not actually take an active part. And the hearing sessions will be webcast live every session. We do ask everybody involved in the process to try and respect other people's point of view, to try and not seek an unfair advantage by, for example, submitting late evidence that might be significant to another party, or to submit multiple items of late evidence. The main parties, at least, and especially those who are submitting statements, will be expected to ensure that all of their statements are comprehensive, contain all of the background information referred to, including any reports or survey information, and any other information that is being relied on at the hearing. All of these items will be publicly available to all parties. Anything Mr. Guilford and I examine in relation to the examination of this order will be in public, so anything we have access to, everybody involved in the process will also have access to. The exception might be personal information, or if there is a commercially sensitive piece of information that we may have to not make publicly available, but those would be very specific and exceptional. There is nothing to prevent a change in position during this process by any party. You may find, as you get access to information, that perhaps part of your objection or support may change based on that additional information you're going to get. And that is perfectly normal as major hearings progress. There isn't anything in the regulations which requires any party to maintain a position they had previously set out in written submissions. We would simply need to know if you had decided that part of your objection was resolved by the information that you are now in receipt of. In presenting your position at the hearing, either in written statements or in actually giving evidence at the hearing itself, try to remember that in examining the draft order, we have a number of alternative outcomes in front of us. We can recommend that the order be made as drafted. We can recommend that the order be made with modifications, or we can recommend that the order not be made at all. So there is actually quite a lot of ground in those three options, but there are things to be made or to keep in mind as you prepare any written statements or give evidence. The hearing itself takes place in a round table format with Mr. Guilford and I at the head of the table and the parties arranged in accordance with support, objection, or major organisations like the council or the football club. There will be space for everybody who needs space at the table. And as we said, it's in a structured discussion rather than a cross-examination style. Are there any questions arising from the format of the hearing? Yes, this lady here.
So I'll just try and shout loudly.
Just he's coming to you.
Thank you. You mentioned the sessions. Do you expect everybody to, is it a meeting that people are going to be coming and going, or are you expecting sessions of 20 minutes, half an hour? Or,
No, I suspect each session will be quite long. The topics that we have identified are quite general, but there is a lot of detail in people's representations and submissions, which I am very sure people will want to discuss and talk about. So at this point in time, as a guide, we would expect each session to be either a morning or an afternoon. I think they will be longer rather than shorter. You will know in advance, the agenda will tell you which session, which topic is being covered in. So as I said, you can either attend only the session that is of direct interest to yourself, or you could attend all of them. You may find, and I think this might be the case for a lot of people, people's representations covered a large number of those topics, and it may be that you have an interest in a lot of them, but realistically, we do think that each session will be a morning or an afternoon.
Okay.
I think as well, what we try to do is accommodate people's a pattern of wishing to attend the hearing if they can only attend at certain times. We would obviously try to accommodate that but obviously there'll be a number of parties, and we're looking at people trying to group together as well as far as possible, both on the side of visitors to events and residents. And so there may be a number of people working together. But the agenda will set out, as Ms Lynch has just indicated, the agenda will set out the subjects and the timings.
Okay.
And, you know, there might be, we think probably maybe 5 days in total. And we appreciate that certain people may have difficulty attending at certain times. So we can try and be flexible and accommodate that, but we obviously have to keep the hearing running efficiently as well.
So will it be daytime?
It definitely be
Yes,
daytime.
it will be
yes.
daytime,
Yes,
when
it'll be from
lots of people will be
10
at work.
o'clock in,
Yep.
well, that can't be helped,
That-
I'm afraid. 10 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock. We may run a bit later than that if necessary.
Okay, I think the person just in front. Thanks.
I prepare to identify myself as Objector 671. It strikes me, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, as the sessions go ahead, there may be something that one of the parties in the session makes a submission on that I may wish to respond to. Will I be allowed to do that, notwithstanding that that's not a substantive point that I've made in my own comparatively brief written submission?
Yes, if you have indicated and you are attending that session as a participant, yes, you absolutely would be allowed to do that.
People can generally ask questions of other parties, but through us. It's different to a public inquiry. There's no cross-examination, but we, as the people who have to make a judgment about all these issues, will be asking quite a lot of questions of the participants. But it'll be done in a friendly manner, and no one should feel intimidated by that process. In fact, one of the things, I think, one of the points we would make is that although a hearing inevitably tends to be an adversarial process because there are people on both sides of the argument, we would actually hope that it's done in an informal and friendly matter, as an informal and as friendly a manner as possible, as long as we meet the terms of the statutes that we have to follow and keep the structure of the meeting. And I think that is quite an important point to make. And one of the other things that I would say is that what we have noticed in reviewing the representations, and this is both objections and letters of support, is that there actually is some common ground. For example, we have a situation where some people attending events are actually sympathetic to the residents facing an influx of parked vehicles. And on the other hand, the residents sometimes indicate that they're quite content if people park considerately. They're still opposing views, but what I'm saying is there is some common ground. So we would obviously look to try and develop that as far as possible. And as Mrs. Lynch has already said, that things may develop as the hearing progresses.
Okay.
Is that helpful? Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I am Norman Yardley on behalf of Harper Church.
Yes.
We, within our submission, suggested some mitigation that could possibly offset the grounds of our objection. When you mentioned that in considering the order, you could recommend some amendments to that order, I wondered whether the amendments, well, within your regulations that you're working within, whether the amendments could be quite specific or whether they're got to be very general. Really, what I mean is, could there be a basis where you're suggesting including these mitigating measures as part of the order?
Yeah. The answer to that question is both. They can be general and very specific. They can be site-specific or topic-specific, and they can also be very general in nature. So the answer is yes to both. Right, if there are no more questions on the format of the hearing, we can move on to agenda item 5. In preparing agenda item 5, our aim is to encourage people to come together, if at all possible, to present common positions on the topics we have identified. At the hearing, we will seek to avoid repetition. It in no way diminishes your evidence if you are part of a group represented by one spokesperson. We have all the written representations in front of us. We have read all of the written representations. The weight we give to evidence does not change based on whether or not you speak it at the hearing or write it down in your representation. We consider all the evidence put in front of us equally. We're going to try and go through this in a logical order, and we hope to finalise as much of this possible today, but we recognise there is likely to be quite a lot of unfinished business, and there will be a period following this meeting within which groups could get together if that is possible, and then the schedule of objection numbers that we have provided on the web page would be updated. Also, I should say that if you find, having attended this meeting, that you no longer wish to take part in the hearing, you can rely solely on the written submissions you have already made, and you're not obliged to make any additional written submissions. You can rely completely on those you have already made. If we begin with the organisations who have indicated that they are taking part, where we refer to you by name or refer to the number of objections, these names and numbers relate only to those who have said they are attending tonight's meeting. Obviously, the overall number of representations in relation to those topics is far, far higher. But what we are trying to do is to try and logically group participants where we feel you have common representations to make, to see if it's possible to organise people so that individuals are not attending by themselves. We're perfectly happy to take evidence from individuals, and if you feel that you don't sit comfortably into a group we've identified, or you simply wish to present your own evidence, that again is entirely possible. So, yes?
Just mention one thing. At this point, no one can really take part in the hearing anonymously. So from now on, when we're discussing this, we have to disclose names and organisations. So just to be clear about that, if anyone has an objection to that, now is the time to do so, because we will do that assuming that everyone who is here is willing to have their name and organisation referred to. Is that okay?
Everybody content with that? Okay. Right. The first party that we're going to confirm will be Glasgow City Council, and they have provided a list of their representatives and those they intend to bring to the hearing as witnesses to present evidence. I'm going to read these out. These notes will be available on the webpage, so you will be able to see all of this information tomorrow or Friday at the very latest, just to prevent you trying to scribble everything down as fast as possible. The Council have legal representation from Harper MacLeod Solicitors, and their representatives are Mr. Peter Ferguson and Ms. Rosalind MacDonald. So they will be the Council's legal representation at the hearing. In addition to that, there will be Mr. Martin McColgan, who's the legal manager from the Chief Executive's Department, Mr. Kevin Hamilton, who's the head of Roads, Neighbourhood and Sustainability, Mr. Andrew Beglin, who's the assistant group manager for parking services, and Helen Morrison, who is the engineering officer at Neighbourhoods and Sustainability. Those parties from the council will present evidence on their particular area of expertise. Yes?
Thank you. In addition to the named officers, there will be 3 additional officers. one officer dealing with air quality, another dealing with equality impacts, and another dealing with policy and strategy.
Did everybody hear that? So that will be 3 additional witnesses from the council addressing the issues of air quality, equality, and policy and strategy. Okay. From Rangers Football Club, we have Mr. Martin, who's the head of security and operations, with us this evening. Mr. Martin, do you think the club will be presenting evidence that will require any other witnesses at the hearing?
Undoubtedly, yes. Unfortunately, I'm unable to identify these individuals at this stage, but certainly the club secretary, who's a lawyer, will probably lead on it.
Okay. And his or her name?
James Blair.
James Blair.
Yeah. I take it it's quite in order to provide details of further participants at a later stage.
Yes. We would require the name, organisation and area of expertise. We'll come on to discuss hearing statements in a moment, and there will be fixed dates for those to be provided. But in the first instance, it would be useful to know who the club intends to rely on. If you don't know the particular individual, at least the organisation and area of expertise would be enough. And again, that will be publicly available on the webpage.
Okay, I'm just going to ask the question now. It's probably not the right time, but I'm curious to know whether or not, as reporters, you will be doing any site visits.
Yes.
You will be?
We will be.
Okay, thank you.
We will be. Thank you.
We should clarify probably that the site inspections that we do before the hearing takes place will be just for us to familiarise ourselves with the area in the vicinity of Ibrox Stadium and relate to the issues raised in the representations. But then at the end of the hearing, we will be discussing more detailed site inspections which may be accompanied or unaccompanied. Obviously the initial ones will be unaccompanied, but then depending on how the hearing proceeds, that may indicate the need or otherwise for more site inspections.
Okay. Sorry, this lady here.
Thank you. Can I just make a suggestion that the site visit occurs when there is a match on?
Well, that's one of the things we're expecting that will rise.
Absolutely, because we will need to see the vicinity of the order and the area where the order encompasses when an event is on.
But we won't be doing that in the pre-hearing unaccompanied site inspections.
No. Thank you. It's a very pertinent point. Thank you.
Sorry, with respect, I didn't understand what you've just said. Did you just say that you wouldn't be visiting prior to the hearing? In your unaccompanied visits, you wouldn't be visiting the area on a match day?
No, that is what we said. We intend to simply do unaccompanied site inspections before the hearing to familiarise ourselves with the site around, with the area of Ibrox Stadium and the area surrounding that where the order is taking place. We would then discuss the need for further site inspections, which may be accompanied or unaccompanied at the hearing, and people will then be able to express a view about when we should go and so forth. That's the intention.
Okay.
Are you unhappy with that?
No, I'm not happy. And I don't want to stray into arguing the merits or demerits of the whole thing. I fully understand that we're talking, this is a pre-hearing, we're not arguing the merits. Allow me then simply to express a considerable surprise that in order to familiarise yourselves with the import of the representations that you've also already read in full in relation to for and against doing something like this, that you would deliberately abjure actually to go walk about on a particularly busy match day. I think, with absolute due respect to both of you, that beggars belief. I thought I respectfully suggest to you that you would wish to inform yourselves, just as you're already informed by the written representations, not only of the basic geographical area, but of the issues of one way or another of events, because it's not simply about the geographical area, it's about the impact for or against of people travelling. And if I can't persuade you, I can't persuade you, but I would have, frankly, feeling in my duty if I didn't suggest to you that you ought to do at least both. Go walk about when it's relatively peaceful, and go walk about when it's not peaceful. And there's a lot of people trying to find somewhere to park, or trying to get into their houses or whatever.
Well, no, you're certainly entitled to express your view about that, and we have no objection to that whatsoever. But can I ask you why you feel that visiting, possibly in an accompanied site visit, after the hearing, when we've heard evidence, why that isn't sufficient to enable us to see on site the issues that have been raised at the hearing? Don't you think it would be unnecessary duplication to do it before and after?
No, not necessarily. It seems to me that just as you're preparing for the hearing by reading all of the written evidence, that to me it is a logical, precaution is the wrong word, but it is a logical precursor for each of you to familiarise yourselves not only with the geographical area and the streets concerned and so on and so forth, but to observe what is essentially is the issue, and therefore for the arguments which no doubt will be put for and against on the day to be all more meaningful for you, for you will have seen firsthand some of the matters to which people are referring. Should you wish to have further tours, great, but I'm perfectly serious, and I realise that it's at your discretion. I really think that would be a wise thing to do first, and might potentially, I also hear what you say about doing it afterwards, but I really think it would be a feather in your cap, it would be a wise precaution actually to do both. Familiarise themselves with the geography and familiarise themselves, at least initially. You're going to hear the arguments on the day as well. But sorry, I'm now going on, and that's not very fair. I've made my point. I ask you to take it very, very seriously.
Well, we thank you very much for that comment. It's very much appreciated to have that sort of detailed comment, and we will consider it. But it would be helpful, since you've raised that, to see if there are any other views about that particular issue.
Thank you. I'm reluctant to speak again. I feel I have to redress the balance and the point made by the Baillie. If you were to so undertake, I think I'm constrained on behalf of the football support to suggest if you're going to utilise time on part of the match day experience, you'd have to utilise the whole match day experience. That would occupy a fair amount of your time, trying various public transport options. The coach journey from Stranraer, having come from Larne, I don't envy you that at all, but I feel I have to redress the balance and say if you're going to take in part of the experience, you would have to take in the whole experience. Thank you.
Well, it would be very extensive site inspections that we would be thinking about, and obviously we have to draw the line somewhere.
No, but we do note your point that a lot of supporters have a very different experience to others, and it's very varied. So, no, that is noted. Thank you.
Any other points on that?
Like this gentleman here.
will you be coming out during a normal working day? I run a business in Ibrox, which this is going to have a disastrous effect on.
What, you mean a non-event day?
Yes.
That is the intention, that we will do both. We will see the area of the order, on a normal day-to-day basis, and then when an event is actually happening, so that we can appreciate both. Thank you. I'd like to come back to the football club if there are no more questions about site visits, and it was simply to wrap up the participation of the club at the hearing itself. And this may be a question you can't answer this evening, and it may be something that isn't possible, but could you in any way explain to what extent you consider it possible that the club could represent the view of supporters? We noted from the comprehensive submission of the club that a lot of the matters raised by individual supporters are matters that the club itself has addressed in its representation. I don't know if there has been any effort to do that, or if you have simply left supporters and the supporters' clubs to represent themselves. But is it possible that the club could perhaps represent some individual supporters?
It's entirely, excuse me, it's entirely possible, but we do have an umbrella body, Club 1872, and two members are here tonight who would be able to perhaps answer that question more fully.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to come on to the supporters clubs in a moment. I'm just going to go through some of the other organisations first. Thank you, Mr. Martin. We have Inspector Simpson from Police Scotland, and I believe you're the local area commander. Will you be attending the hearing, or do you think a representative will be?
Probably from our operational planning department.
Okay.
And from traffic, thank you. And from traffic management, but we will be represented from the Greater Glasgow Division.
Okay, thank you. Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and Scottish Ambulance Service, who are not here this evening, but they have indicated that they will be attending the hearing, so we will expect evidence from them. SP... good, thank you.
Spoken with our area commander, Roddy Keith, who wanted to be here tonight but couldn't manage. He intends to come, and I'll support him as the Civil Contingencies Officer for the area.
Right, thank you very much. SPT, I believe we have Mr. Bruce Keelow and Elizabeth Mackay. Are you both intending to attend the hearing, or will representatives from SPT be there in your place?
Yeah, at the moment it will be the two of us.
Okay.
If that changes, we'll let you know.
Okay, thank you. And as I said, there are two supporters clubs here this evening. Club 1872, and I think that's Ms. Fawkes. And there's also Claire Wallace and William Wallace. Are they in attendance this evening from Rangers Supporters Association? No. Okay. We know you've expressed that you will be attending the hearing. Will you be bringing any witnesses with you to address specific issues, or will it be yourselves that are attending?
We have a number of working groups that represent various sections of the Rangers support, so disabled supporters, travelling support, Rangers supporters clubs. I think it's worth pointing out that although we're called Club 1872, we're not a Rangers supporters club. They are, generally speaking, groups of Rangers supporters who travel together to the matches, and they're allocated tickets on the basis of how they organise themselves. We're an independent shareholder in Rangers Football Club. We're a community interest company. So we're quite different from a supporters club. We have board members and working group members who operate at a fairly senior level within the organisation, who, as I said, represent various aspects of the Rangers support. Rangers supporters are disabled, travelling support and whatnot. So I would imagine that we would have a small number of working group members, perhaps 2 board members, and maybe 2 working group members. We'll have a look at the list that you provided of the areas of interest that you'll be addressing, and try and identify maybe a couple of other people in addition to 2 board members who would best speak to those issues.
That would be very useful, thank you.
I think we said that when this was discussed yesterday, we said that we were looking for people to maybe come forward within a month or so from now, so that there's plenty of time to actually discuss with your members, of those of you with organisations, to decide how you would like to present evidence. And we'll be coming on in a bit to talk about those who were going to submit statements.
Okay, I think it's worth also pointing out that there are a number of supporters clubs who might have made representations, and I think you mentioned the association. So they represent various supporters clubs. We are quite different from them, as I said, in that we're a shareholder, so we would be happy to make representations on their behalf, but because they don't share those unique aspects that I've already shared with you in terms of being major shareholders in the club, and the legal entity that is Club 1872 is a community interest company, and that's unique to us, so we would want to make representations directly to the committee. But if any of the supporters clubs that have made representations directly to you want to sort of fall under our submission, we would be happy to speak for them.
Okay, thank you very much. We will come on and discuss how that can be made possible once we've gone through the remaining organisations. We have, under the heading of MSPs and local members, we have Bailey Normal MacLeod here this evening, and also Councillor John Molyneux, who I don't think is in attendance this evening, but who has indicated that he would like to appear at the hearing. In addition, we have identified 3 community councils. We have the Craigton Community Council, and I think that's Mr. Roxburgh. Drummoyne Community Council, and that's Ms. McCafferty and Ms. Donan, and also Mr. Rivet from Dumbreck Community Council. All of the community councils have made written representations, most of them very substantive and comprehensive. They do cover very pertinent points. If there are individual residents who have not seen the community council's submissions to date, I would urge you to look on the webpage. They are available, and see if the issues you have raised have been raised by the community council. All 3 community councils have indicated that they will be attending the hearings. So, in addition to community councils, we have the Harper Church, which is a local church, and you also will be attending the hearing.
Thank you. As I mentioned, we've put in a written submission, and I think we're content because we have a very specific and very local issues. I think there are perhaps larger things to debate at the hearing, so we would be content on your understanding that this written submission is considered by you, that we would allow that written submission to stand.
Without attending the hearing?
Without attending, with your guarantee you take that.
Could I confirm then, you made an additional written submission in March 2020, which is available on the webpage. Are you content for that and your original submission to be considered as your submission?
We are, yes. And
Thank you very much.
And preparing, ready to engage with the council over the mitigations.
Thank you. In addition to the organisations, we've also identified a number of businesses within the order area that have expressed an interest in attending the hearing. Mr. Matthewson? And are you intending to attend the hearing? Okay, no, I know, I appreciate that completely. There was Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Oh, lovely. Are you intending on attending the hearing? Do you think? Right, okay. And there's also a Mr. Marshall, or his representative from the Loudon Tavern. he has expressed an interest in attending or sending a representative to attend the hearing. On top of the organisations, businesses and companies, there are a number of individuals who have made substantive and comprehensive representations on a variety of matters. What we would like to explore is it possible for those individuals to group together on particular issues? And this could be groups of individual football supporters who oppose the order, or a group of residents who support the order. There is nothing at all against a combination of both if their interests are aligned, however unlikely that might appear to be. And we should say at this stage, this is also an opportunity for people who haven't made representations to take part in the process, because you could join a group that has made representations. We've identified some potential topics that we feel there could be alignment for discussion at the hearing. We should at this point say the hearing will have a limited amount of time in which to hear evidence. We will listen to everybody, but we can't have constant repetition of the same topic, but simply a different person saying the same thing. As we said at the beginning, we have read all the representations. We do fully appreciate the effort made in all the evidence submitted to date, and the weight we will give to written submissions versus evidence presented at the hearing. There is no difference. We consider each piece of evidence put in front of us equally. So, what we have tried to do is look at the topics set out at paragraph 3.3 and try to loosely arrange parties under those headings. It is a little difficult, and we should say at the outset, nothing obliges any of you to be in these groups. We are simply saying we feel these parties align quite well, and it may suit you to be able to be part of a larger group and appoint one spokesperson to speak on your behalf at the hearing. So the first one we've identified is the management of inconsiderate and unsafe parking in residential areas within the proposed zone. And this may include groups specific to individual areas within the zone. We feel that the community councils have probably already covered this, but are there any residents who have made individual representations who feel that the community councils might be able to represent their interests at the hearing?
I think we should also mention that when we discussed the topics under paragraph 3.3 of the explanatory note, we were talking about subcategories, and insofar as people who are supporting the order is concerned, there are a number of issues that we would consider to be objections which tend to relate to the permit system. And that, we think, is a specific issue which will be a subject at the hearing. It wasn't picked up in the explanatory note. We appreciate that, but that we think is something that will be picked up. And so, just to mention that there is an issue there that we're aware of.
So we have thought, and at this point I do have to read out the individual representations, and these are not a comprehensive list of those who've made representations on this matter. They're people who indicated they would attend the hearing or this pre-hearing meeting. We have David Martin, John Corbett, Rosie Cullen, Michaela Shahid, Mohammed Shahid, Maureen Campbell with Mr. Mark Campbell to represent, Gordon Murray, Martin McIntyre, Andalib Ahmed and Derek McLean. Are any of those people in attendance this evening? So do you think that you perhaps have not seen the Community Council representations? Would you be interested in aligning with the community councils, or do you think you might move forward as an individual?
Yeah, I need to review the community council representation again, but I think it's also important that you hear individually, how inconsiderate parking, etc., impacts individuals individually is very, very different. And I think it's important to hear that. And so therefore, yeah, I'd like to attend that.
Okay.
But there is, of course, a possibility of residents actually grouping together as well. And so we're not saying that you have to do that, but we're just looking at that as an option which might make the process more efficient and might actually help people who are giving
I think
evidence.
sometimes the experience of residents differs by the same incident happening, and I think it's important for you to hear the individual experiences and the impact that it has on individuals, which will differ among individuals within the one area relating to a similar issue.
Well, everyone who wishes to give evidence will be able to do so, if necessary, individually. All we're doing is looking at options that we might consider to make the process run a little more smoothly. But there's no question that people who wish to give individual evidence will be able to do so.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely. Have the community councils been in contact with each other at all? I understand there's specific issues within your representations that apply only to your specific geographical area, but there are also a lot of overlapping issues, and I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look. Could I ask that you perhaps try and do that, to review each other's representations? We will facilitate contact between groups, individuals and organisations through the programme officer. You'll note from the webpage that the redaction on representations prevents you from seeing any personal information or contact details from really any party apart from specific organisations. In order to make contact with another party, you would in the first instance contact the programme officers via the email that they have provided to you and tell them which representation you're interested in. They will then contact that person to see if they're willing to speak to you. So in the first instance, they will provide a go-between service to prevent any mismanagement of personal information, and then after that it will be up to the parties to discuss whether or not they have any matters on which they can agree and agree shared representation. So I hope that makes sense. You should all have the programme officer's email address. If not, I will give it out at the end of the meeting, and a reminder of the webpage address so that everybody is aware of that. As Mr. Guilford said, there are potentially a lot of areas of alignment, and it doesn't need to be those who are simply objecting. There are a lot of parties who have indicated that they consider people park considerately on match days, and that there are other ways other than the order in which to enforce unsafe or inconsiderate parking. All of those issues will be addressed at the hearing. So the next topic that we thought parties could align on is the displacement of parking to areas outside the zone. There's at least one resident outside the zone who has expressed concern about this, and that's Ms. McLaughlin. And at least 4 visitors to the area on match days who park have mentioned that they are also very concerned about the impact of the potential displacement of parking to areas outside the zone. So we have a Mr. Kerr, a Mr. Seaborn, a Mr. Upton and a Mr. Patterson. Again, many more representations on this matter, but those are the people who'd indicated that this was a particular concern of theirs. Difference in the basis for objection, but common ground where people could work together. If you think that is possible, I would ask you again, contact the programme officer to see if you wish to appoint a spokesperson to address that common matter. It is a specific topic, a subtopic of parking that we will be looking at the hearing. So it may be that people could work quite well together. Economic impact is the next one. We have identified at least 7 people who indicated they were attending this evening that was a particular concern of theirs, and it really relates to the effect on the overall economy or on specific businesses as a result of reduced match attendance and reduced footfall on event days. Is there any interest from any party in leading a group on that? If not, you certainly don't have to commit this evening to forming a group. As I said, there will be a 4-week period within which we would expect people to align if they can and let us know. If not, again, we are happy to take individual evidence at the hearing, but again, we will have to minimise the amount of repetition. Disadvantaged groups. A matter raised in a very large number of objections and submissions. At least 6 people here this evening have raised this issue. We did identify subcategories of the elderly, those with different abilities, women, young children, and also those with a lack of mobility, but those without access to the blue badge parking scheme was a particular issue for a lot of people who attend events and matches. I suspect from what the 1872 Club said earlier, that will be an area that you will address. I don't know if there's anybody else here this evening who feels that perhaps Club 1872 could represent them on this. It is a very wide area, we appreciate that, but it is a matter that has been raised repeatedly in representations, and again, to avoid repetition at the hearing, it would be very useful to have a spokesperson to address those matters. Yep. So that's Ms. Fawkes.
I'm not sure which of our submissions is publicly available, but the first letter that we wrote to Glasgow City Council about this specifically mentioned that issue, and I spoke in that letter about my own circumstances, and I have a son who's disabled and at that point wasn't entitled to a blue badge. That was a specific concern for me as a supporter, and that was something that at that point Club 1872 made a representation about, so that's certainly something that we would be happy to speak to other individuals or groups about.
I think all of the submissions are publicly available now on the webpage. They're entered numerically, so in consecutive numerical order. It's an issue that arose with a large number of visitors to the stadium, so I imagine there would be interest in it. If anybody does wish to speak to that topic at the hearing, it would be worth perhaps contacting Ms. Fawkes via Club 1872 to see if you are content that their representation covers the points you have raised.
Can I just, this is perhaps me being unnecessarily confused, but I just wanted to be clear. We have representations from the Rangers Supporters Association and a separate representation from the 1872 Club.
2 separate organisations.
But you're concerned with both of those?
No.
No.
Only 1872.
Okay. So are the
no.
Rangers Supporters Association, they're not here tonight?
No, they had indicated but they have indicated they intend to attend the hearing.
Okay, so we'll have 2 separate.
Yeah, but as I said, we would be happy to speak to them about us representing them and any other Rangers Supporters Club who wants to be represented by someone else.
And that would be very useful.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Thank you. The next topic we identified, and again, the subject of almost all representations, was off-street parking, including park and ride, and public transport. And public transport would cover capacity of existing transport, the difficulty of using public transport, and that would be in terms of cost, time, and access to public transport, and any potential improvements to parking facilities and public transport, which would facilitate access to the stadium on event days. We realise that a very large number of people have addressed those issues in their representations, so we are very keen to see if we can find an umbrella group that could appoint a spokesperson to speak to those. I'm not sure if anybody would wish to lead that. It may fall, we thought quite logically, perhaps to the football club or to the Supporters Association, but in their absence, I'm certainly not going to suggest they do anything at all. But it may be that if you have made a representation on that basis, you could look at the Supporters Association. Their representation, which is available on the webpage, is again quite comprehensive and substantial and addresses all of those issues. If you think they could represent your interests, then it would be worth contacting them to ask them could they do exactly that. If not, again, we will accept individual contributions, but would again make the point about repetition. Given the fact that so many representations address those issues, it simply would not be efficient to hear from every single party making the same point. We would urge you to review the submissions of the club and Club 1872 and the Supporters Club. Each of their submissions is comprehensive and addresses just, out with individual site-specific objections most of the issues raised in individual representations. If you do align yourself with an existing group or a group that is created following this evening's meeting, we will still have regard to your individual written submissions. Please don't think simply because you form part of a group or are represented by a group that we won't. We absolutely will. We should address provisions for contributions for those attending the hearing who have not made representations and are not covered by anything we have discussed this evening. Generally, such people will be regarded as observers at the proceedings, and we would not expect them to submit any evidence at this point in time. This doesn't preclude any such person seeking clarification on a particular matter or providing points of a factual nature. We do have a little bit of time. I don't know if there is any interest in the room in taking 10 minutes to discuss with perhaps any person you see that might be interested in aligning with anybody else. Shall we take 10 minutes to see if you can do that? Perhaps the community councils could speak to each other. Perhaps any individuals here might find that access to either the club or Ms. Fawkes from 1872 might be of assistance. It may clarify in your mind that you don't wish to do that, but the opportunity is here to perhaps have a very quick 10-minute chat to each other to see if that's possible. So it's 22 minutes to 9. If we could perhaps take just under 5 to 10 minutes, and then we can come back and see if anything has progressed. As I said, you're under no obligation to do so whatsoever, but while we are here and you have access to other parties, I would urge you to at least explore it, should you wish.
Can I just mention on the transport issue, we did split that up a little bit in the bullet points in the explanatory note, so it might be helpful just to be aware that there are particular issues relating to the capacity of existing transport, that's rail and bus, and then there's issues relating to people's difficulty in using public transport, particularly at late at night or on Sundays, these types of things. And then there's a group who look at the possibility of improvements to public transport and also the use of park and ride, maybe even parking temporarily until transport is improved. These are things that have been raised, so we split them into those categories. So if people are looking at that, they could, consider whether they have a particular interest in any of those any of those groups. I suppose we should just check and make sure everybody's happy enough to have a 10-minute break with
Yes.
a show of hands or something.
If you
happy,
don't-
or you can do it because you could do it after.
Are you happy? Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you all. It's very good to see you all communing with each other. If you have managed to come to any agreement, or if you have managed to align yourselves, could you please let the programme officers know in due course who will be representing who, or who will be jointly appearing at the hearing. At the end of the session this evening, I will give you the programme officer's email address just to remind you what it is, and also the web page address, so you can access all of the documentation you need. So, moving on to item 6 on the agenda, which is statements and documents. In order to have a fully effective and efficient hearing, we will be requiring hearing statements from specific parties. At this point in time, the parties we have identified to specifically seek hearing statements from are Glasgow City Council, Rangers Football Club, Police Scotland, SPT, the Rangers Supporters Association, 1872 Club, and the community councils, or any combination of community councils that you have arrived at. We had intended to ask Harper Church, but you have already indicated that you are going to rely on the written submissions made already. Those written submissions from Harper Church are available on the webpage at this point in time. Are the parties I have just mentioned content that you will be submitting hearing statements? If you are not, just raise your hand. No. Those hearing statements will be available on the webpage as they are submitted to the hearing process. For those who have not been involved in a hearing process before, a hearing statement will involve effectively the case that that party is going to put forward at the hearing. It should contain the position of that particular party, their evidence base. It should also contain any survey material that they will be relying on, any maps they will be relying on, any background information, any regulations or documentation that they will be relying on at the hearing. Any surveys and impact assessments will be also available on the webpage when they're submitted by the parties. Ideally, we would like one date for the submission of all statements and accompanying information. It had been discussed yesterday that perhaps the council could submit their hearing statement and accompanying documentation before other parties. Ideally, we would prefer one date for submissions.
I think we said we would consider that, didn't we? In terms of, but obviously we need to know today what the view of parties is as well.
I don't know if anybody has a particular view on that. The convention in planning and environmental hearings is that the council would submit its hearing statement first, and then there is a period for people to assimilate information and respond if required. In this instance, that might not be necessary. People's representations are already made and in general well-founded. The only point at which people may wish to make additional submissions is when you see survey information that perhaps you haven't had access to before. However, the hearing is an opportunity to discuss those matters. So, what we are suggesting is that there is a period of 6 weeks from now in which hearing statements can be prepared and finalised, and any evidence gathered and put into a format that can be put on the webpage. If you have difficulty in preparing information that can be submitted and uploaded to a webpage, please contact the programme officer, who will try to assist you. That 6 weeks would take us up to the week of the 21st of April 2020, and then we would have a 1 month period prior to the hearing for all parties to absorb all of the information and to determine your final positions before attending the hearing. That would take us to the week beginning of the 26th of May at the very earliest. We should at this point say that the issue of coronavirus was raised yesterday. At the moment, NHS Scotland and Scottish Government advice does not indicate avoiding events such as the hearing. That obviously may change. It's simply an unknown at this point in time. Being prudent, we would expect some, perhaps, limitation on public events, but probably in the intervening period to the end of May, beginning of June. We will, of course, take into account any advice that comes from NHS Scotland and Scottish Government, and if that means postponing the hearing or moving the date, then I'm afraid that will be unavoidable. You will be advised as soon as possible if that eventuality actually happens. The programme officer will contact you via the email address that you've provided already. But at this point in time, we are going to proceed on the basis that those dates are achievable. If that changes, it will be out of all of our hands, and therefore we will react accordingly. Mr. MacLeod.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. With no prior consultation, you have just articulated a date, that is to say, to commence your public hearing on Tuesday the 26th of May and continuing thereafter. Earlier this evening you talked about potentially 10 sessions, 5 days of morning and afternoon. And if you'll allow me to indulge in special pleading, were that to be the week that you selected, then that would be of particular assistance to those of us who otherwise ordinarily are involved in work with the City Council, as attending all sorts of committee meetings and so on and so forth. That happens to be a relatively light week, although it's not a council recess, and it might facilitate officers. As I say, I'm kind of special pleading for me. If that doesn't happen because of the virus or whatever, then my supplementary special pleading would be to say, if you end up having to postpone, please don't postpone for a week, but perhaps commence on, maybe about 4 weeks later on the 26th of June, by which time the council will have gone into recess.
The difficulty with the 26th of June is school holidays begin in Scotland on the 26th of June. And
that's very true, yes. And council holidays begin then as well. We're actually supposed to go on holiday. But at any rate, the council officers can speak for themselves, but there are relatively few, if any, at present council committee meetings due to take place in that week. And so if you were able, as far as I'm concerned, you can start on the May Day holiday, but I don't think that'd be very popular. That's Monday the 25th. And if we're all less verbose than I am ordinarily, do you think we might even get it done in 8 sessions rather than 10? Or?
Well, that very much depends on what everybody has to say. But, really, what you do have to bear in mind is the hearing sessions will be led by Mr. Guilford and I, and based on the questions that we have, and those questions will be based on the hearing statements and the evidence submitted by all the parties. If that is comprehensive and comprehensible to us, then the hearing sessions will be consequently much more focused, because we will have less questions. So I would urge you, if at all possible, to include as much as possible, include all of your evidence base, so that we can actually...
I'm deeply shocked. You've just said you'll have less questions rather than fewer, and I congratulated you on your English earlier on.
You did.
Anyway, yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
So those dates are not fixed in stone. That is effectively what we are saying. That is what we are working towards at the moment. It may change due to circumstances outside our control. But if you could bear in mind that those are the dates we are working to, we are going to discuss allowing a response to statements within 2 weeks of exchange. That may be the 6th of May. We haven't got a definitive answer on that, but we will let you know. There's a question here.
Thank you. Mark Campbell of Dumbarton Community Council here. Just to clarify, you were saying in previous hearings that the lead, for in this instance Glasgow City Council, would be the first to put their hearing statements in. Surely that should still be the same way on this hearing as well, that the main proponent of bringing this legislation in is Glasgow City Council. So I think it should be only right that they should be putting their statement in first and then allowing everybody else to get theirs in. They're the main proponent of this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we're obviously considering that because that point of view has been expressed elsewhere, so we need to take that into account. We'll be saying at the end here that the note of matters agreed at or arising from this meeting will be put on the web page, and there will be an opportunity for people to comment for 14 days, and that's not just people here, it's people who are relying on written submissions as well, and we're going to take all that into account before finalising it.
Yeah. Thank you. If you are not submitting a formal hearing statement, but you intend to attend the hearing and give evidence, we are content to accept written submissions from individuals. You can also rely on the written submissions you have made already. You are under no obligation to make any additional submissions if you feel you don't need to. But if you do make submissions, they obviously need to be submitted on time and in a format that can be uploaded to the web page.
Yeah, there's a particular point about that I would just make as well, in that when we're talking about the submission of statements here, that's a separate thing from your ability to make additional written submissions. You can make additional written submissions related to the representation. They'll be uploaded to the web page, but that's it. With statements that we're requesting, they have a specific format, and it's necessary to exchange the statements with all the others that are submitting statements, and also they'll be put on deposit. So that's part of the statutory process, just to clarify.
Okay.
I'm sorry I didn't understand that last bit. I do beg your pardon, but I didn't understand.
Well, I'm very sorry about that. Do you want me?
No, I'm simply telling you the truth. I'm not criticising you. I was about to ask you, you indicated that you're going to ask certain parties to make pre-hearing statements, the City Council, Police Scotland, etc., etc. You're going to ask them, and I'm sure it'll be less, more than their job's worth if they don't do as you've politely requested. For the rest of us who are entitled to turn up because we made a representation either for or against whatever, you've just referred to two different ways in which we potentially could supplement that which we've already indicated in writing. I think you've just indicated two ways in which we could do it. One is, pardon me, one would appear to be that we could supplement whatever representations we've already made in writing to make further writings before a due date, and that's just further writings which will appear on the website, but it's just further writings. Separately and additionally, it appears from what you've just said, Lance, that we could, if we wish, if we're going to turn up at the hearing and we would like to have the formality of having a prior to turning up hearing statement, which presumably is along the lines of, here is what I intend to argue, we could do that as well. But you've just said we can only do that in a certain predetermined template. So if that's the case, where do I get the template and what's my deadline and so on and so forth?
No, I'm sorry if I didn't explain this very well. The submission of statements that we've asked people to make is part of the statutory process. The ability to make further written submissions is something that we're making available to everyone. You can either rely on your original written submission, or you can make further written submissions. That's it, 2 processes. I think what you might be thinking about is, for example, in a public inquiry where precognitions are prepared, which is what people are going to say at the hearing. That we don't have that with hearings. So there isn't any requirement to put in what you're going to say at the hearing. It's just the ability to supplement your original representation if you feel, as things develop and you see things on the website, that you need to make further responses. So there's only 2 processes here that we're talking about.
Okay, but I don't need to formalise these additional comments or representations that I can submit in writing. No. I don't need to formalise them in the way that those whom you have asked for a hearing statement. Right. First of all, I don't need to do that, and secondly, right. It wouldn't carry any. It wouldn't carry any additional weight by my trying to style it.
No, that's correct.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yes,
yep,
that's correct.
That's correct.
Thank you. That's clear. Thank you.
Okay.
Apologies for not making it clear first time.
A question here as well.
Thank you. At one stage, I was contemplating making a comparatively brief submission, which I was also going to put in writing. I think the structure of the hearing, the structure of the discussion at the hearing probably won't facilitate that. If nevertheless I was to choose to put together a short written statement, will it be redacted the same way as the original correspondence, or are we now out of the redaction phase?
No, everything that is put on the website is redacted in accordance with the Council's GDPR policy. What we have said is that when you participate in the hearing, then we have to have a name and the name of any organisation you represent. I don't think it's possible to properly take part in a hearing without that, and I think most people have accepted that. But other than that, all personal and financial information is redacted. So if there's anything and this applies to everybody, if there's anything in statements or documents that are submitted to accompany those statements that needs to be redacted, it still will be.
Thank you. Very, very briefly, have you given consideration to the conclusion of the hearing and the taking of the evidence, the parties having an opportunity to make a very brief, in my case extremely brief, short summation?
Well, it's not normally required in relation to hearings, but really that will depend upon how the hearing progresses and what evidence is led. And if people feel that they need to make closing submissions, then they can raise that. But it's not normal to do that.
Thank you.
There may be an opportunity to make closing submissions in writing, and if there is, we would indicate that at the end of the hearing and give a fixed period of time for people to do that in. So normally at hearings, as Mr. Guilford said, there isn't the opportunity to make a summation or a closing statement, but if we feel it's required, we can request closing submissions.
That's fair enough.
Yep. So in moving to Item 7, a date and venue for the hearing. As we've indicated, given the 10 topics we've identified, we expect it might possibly be half a day on each topic. It might be less, but again, as we said, that depends very much on what the statements contain. and we anticipate that each day would be 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. with appropriate breaks. The suggested venue is here. It is accessible by multiple modes of transport. It's central and is easy to access for non-Glasgow residents. Is there any objection to using the concert hall as a venue for the hearing? No? Good. What we do need to agree, and this is something Mr. Guilford and I will discuss in detail, is the capacity for the hearing. There were over 1,500 representations made to the order. Obviously, not everybody is going to take part in the hearing, but there are approximately 50 people in the room this evening. The hearing will be advertised in the evening times, so those who have made representations will be aware that the hearing is taking place. It may generate a large amount of interest, but conversely it may not. So this room has seating capacity in this format for 250 people. We will advise you which room will be used. The format will be different. Obviously, it's a kind of round table discussion, so it's tables set out in a very large rectangle, so the capacity would be a lot less. Whichever capacity we decide is required, there will be room for people who are attending and taking part, with a table for your documents, laptop, etc. And there will be also seating in this style for people who are simply observing. We will know in advance who is taking part in each session every day, so appropriate arrangements will be made for, hopefully, everybody.
I think we should probably ask for any views about capacity, particularly from supporters associations, because that's where the majority of the representations have come from. The basic principle is that, and the notice will say that people with an interest may attend the hearing. And so there's a very specific statutory requirement there. Having said that, at the end of the day, there may be logistical difficulties with that if 1,000 people wish to turn up. So I mean, it's a difficult one, but if anyone has any views, we would welcome them to take into account.
I'll just speak up. Sinead, you just said a moment ago, thank you very much, and thank you. You said a moment ago, Sinead, that you will know in advance of each session how many people are going to turn up.
No.
I thought that was what you said.
How many people are taking part? People observing, we simply won't know who is going to show up in advance.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Let me start again. How will you know in advance of any particular session how many people have indicated they're going to turn up to take part, i.e. folk like us that have actually made, that are entitled to speak, as opposed to members of the public who would like to come along and watch?
Well, because we've already asked those questions.
Yeah. We've asked.
So we have a note of that.
We already know, people have indicated that they intend to participate in the hearing. We will then specifically ask people when we have a timetable. The programme officer will contact the parties who've indicated that they wish to take part. Which sessions, all, 1, 2, whichever, they wish to attend, and then we will work accordingly.
Okay, that's very helpful. At the moment, if everybody who has indicated at the moment that they potentially want to turn up and take part, i.e. speak, enter into discussion, part of the round table, what's that present maximum number?
About 60, but that doesn't take into account, for example, the club, who I would expect to bring expert witnesses on a number of matters. So that would probably be, in total, between 70 and 75. Not everybody will attend every session.
No.
Not obviously, not everybody from the council will attend every session. They'll attend the sessions appropriate to them. And again, as we said, if people can align, that brings those numbers down.
Sinead, you're asking for views. My view, for what it's worth, based on the information you've just given, is that your big circle probably wants to be capable of seating 80 to 100 people, and you have seats for interested members of the public, as it were, in the back benches, as it were. I'm actually somewhat relieved, because I think if there were 1,500 people turning up, it would be a little bit unmanageable. But we do want to make sure that everybody's point of view is able to be expressed to you.
Absolutely, and that is the intention, that we make available the ability to attend the hearing, even if you haven't indicated that you're participating actively, you can at least observe. That is our difficulty, because of the very large number of representations. We simply, it's an unknown at the moment how many people could actually attend. I should point out that the representations came from, areas all over Europe. So it's unlikely that every one of those would attend, but you simply don't know, because it's not limited to those who've made representations. Anybody with an interest in the matters being discussed can attend. So we will give it more thought and let you all know what conclusion we've arrived at. But rest assured, if you do express an intention to participate, you will be participating, and we will make every facility available to you.
There is a room in the Royal Concert Hall here that has 500 capacity. So in using the Royal Concert Hall, there are alternatives to think about.
Yes. Okay, any comments at all? It also, we will be advising people that the entirety of the hearing will be webcast live every day. So although that won't allow active participation, it will allow active observation of the proceedings. So we're now at item 8, which is other matters and closing. I will say a few things. I know there are a number of questions which people want to ask. So if we move to those, first of all, this lady here in the third row.
Carol Lynch, Rangers season ticket holder. You stated earlier that you were making recommendations to the Glasgow City Council. I'm just curious as to whether they have to abide by those recommendations or whether they can totally ignore them one way or the other.
Well, the regulations allow that we make recommendations only, so it will be for the City Council to decide whether or not to accept those recommendations.
I kind of feel that's an exercise in futility, having all these meetings and representations if they're not going to listen to what you're actually saying.
I think we could possibly add, though, that since this process is in public and our report will be published, the content of the report will be available for everyone to see and in the public domain, and the council is expected to at least consider the issues that are raised, even if they decide not to follow the recommendations. So perhaps it isn't completely futile.
I hope not.
Thank you. Are there any other matters that anybody wishes to raise at this point that we haven't covered in the meeting?
Thank you once again. Given the substantial and not unexpected redaction of personal information in the various representations, I would invite the reporters to consider producing either an executive summary of the addresses of the local residents who made submissions in support of the proposal, so that we can gather information as to which geographic area they represent. I think everyone will be aware of the number of plans. Let's just call it north, south, east and west. It would be useful to have information as to whether the majority of those representations affected north, south, east or west. in order that submissions might be made about proportionality. If you're not with me in the suggestion of an executive summary, perhaps production of a map, literally sticking pins in the map, again, to show us the streets which are represented by those representations, that would be useful for submission purposes. Thank you.
Okay. We will certainly give it some thought, and if it is possible to provide that, we will. If it is, it will be uploaded onto the webpage and made available to all parties. Again, I would reiterate that anything Mr. Guilford and I consider in our examination of the order will be available to every party. Any other matters or comments or anything in relation to the hearing or this meeting that anybody wishes to raise at this time? If not, I will let you know that a note of the matters discussed and agreed and arising from this meeting will be uploaded onto the webpage as soon as we possibly can. I would ask you to check the webpage. If you don't know the webpage address, I will give it to you now. It is on the Glasgow City Council website under Roads and Parking, then Proposed Parking Controls, then Ibrox Stadium. The related documents are all in the right-hand column. They will be updated regularly, so as you have an interest in the matter, it's worth checking quite regularly to see what is put on there. Once the note of matters has been agreed and uploaded, we will allow parties, i.e. all of you, a period of 14 days to make any comments on the note if you feel we've missed something, or if you feel there is something that perhaps you haven't thought of at this point of time but occurs to you after the event. Please contact the programme officer and let them know. Once we have all of those comments within the 14-day period, we will then finalise the note of the meeting and put it on the web page. Again, over 1,500 representations and approximately between 50 and 60 people here this evening. There will be much larger interest in the proceedings than the number of people here, so it's very important that all of these things are on the web page. Is everybody clear how to access the web page? Mr. MacLeod?
All right, here speaks a Luddite. I don't go to web pages ordinarily. I simply don't. I have two practical suggestions. One is that if there is a database of the email addresses of everybody who's made a submission, you might like to remind or get the programme people to remind people of the programme people's address for correspondence and the website. And I think you said that the Glasgow Evening Times Herald was represented here this evening. Whoever is here might like to take a careful note of the website address of Glasgow City Council for this purpose, at least of the website address, and actually include that in their article. And simply, you know, the easier we make it, and that was a fairly long website address you read out, which is not necessarily an easy one to find. But if that's where all the info is going to be, and there is public interest in this matter, both those of us who want to come to the hearing and others, so the more we can make that available, the better. My first suggestion is maybe the folk who are here tonight and or the folk who are not here tonight in the 1,500 people, even if they can be reminded of by an email from the whatever these folk are called, the programme people,
programme officers.
Just to remind, they're the correspondence to get to you, and here's the website address, and just to make it as transparent and as easy as possible for people to take part and or to come and watch as they may consider, or to comment on the summary of this evening's thing. And my only other comment is to thank both of you and everybody else here for your courtesy and for allowing me to speak so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. MacLeod. The programme officers will remind all parties of key dates and will remind you that, you know, hearing statements are required, hearing statements have been uploaded, key dates for the hearing itself. We will be in touch via email. The programme officers are on a very efficient database of everybody who has made representations to date. So all that is left for me to say this evening is to thank you all.
Just one brief thing, just to mention that we're not relying completely on the website. We recognise that there are still some people who don't have access to the internet, and in those cases the programme officers will arrange to make sure people can view any document that they wish to see, because they're obviously all available at the council's headquarters, the offices. If you can't see anything or access anything on the website, contact the programme officers.
Yes.
And the final thing is just to ask the council, I think maybe Mr Ferguson, whether or not there is a need for an extension under Article 16.3 in relation to this order, in the event that we don't get the process finished in time for the current position.
Just to give context, when an order is made, it should normally be complete within a period of 2 years under the regulations, hence our question.
Yes, an extension has been requested and granted, and that extends to the 27th of October this year.
So there's provision for a further extension if the process isn't completed by then?
There is an opportunity in the regulations to request a further 3 extensions of up to 6 months each. So yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, if there are no other matters arising, I would thank you all for your attendance this evening. It is much appreciated. I think we have achieved a lot. Subject to external matters, we would expect to see you all late May, early June at the hearing sessions, and we look forward to seeing any of the hearing statements and written submissions as you see fit. I would urge you to contact the programme officer should you require anything in terms of matters arising from this evening, particularly in relation to collaborating with other parties with similar interests. But I will formally close the pre-hearing meeting and thank you again. Good evening.